Hundreds of millions of gallons of nitrogen-polluted water are being released into the bay by Sarasota County. It's been going on for years. We'll find out why and what's being done about it right now on the Suzanne Atwell Show. Hello and welcome to the Suzanne Atwell Show. I'm Suzanne Atwell. In this episode, man-made water pollution in Sarasota County. An unintended environmental crisis, a long-known threat to public health and our quality of life. How did we get here, and what are the contributing causes? It is a story of unregulated development, decades of civic neglect, and enough blame to include every homeowner and resident of the county. The post-war economic boom in the 50s and 60s provided discretionary income for a growing middle class. Vacations and even modest second homes became possible for many. Sun, beaches, and most importantly, water made Florida the most popular destination in the country. The demand for affordable housing was met by tract construction of so-called cookie-cutter homes. Unfortunately, the cheapest and the fastest way to deal with sewage disposal was septic tanks, a primary source of nitrogen pollution. The result? Today in Sarasota County, there are over 40,000 homes using septic tanks, many built in the 50s and 60s. None require permits, are regulated, or inspected. Most homes have lawns. Lawns require water, fertilizer, and weed killers. Spill-off from these chemicals are another source of nitrogen pollution, as are farms and commercial agriculture like cattle ranches. As these facts demonstrate, municipal and county water treatment plants are not the sole source of nitrogen pollution. That said, by the 1970s, Sarasota County government recognized we had major water pollution problems. A comprehensive waste and water system master plan delivered to the county commissioners in 1970 presented an unmitigated warning from an unlikely source. Quote, "The 1970s must be the years when America pays its debt to the past by reclaiming the purity of its air, its waters, and our living environment. It is literally now or never." The speaker, then President Richard M. Nixon. The report had a familiar theme. Quote, "The treatment of wastewater and management of the effluent from the process is one of the major environmental problems now facing Sarasota County." That stark scientific warning was made to county commissioners 50 years ago. Sadly, we are having the same conversation today, which takes us to the Sarasota County Bee Ridge Water Reclamation Facility. Located on Lorraine Road, east of I-75, the facility was constructed in 1994. According to the county website, it has a capacity to treat 12 million gallons per day. While the reclaimed water it processes is safe for irrigating lawns, it contains high levels of nitrogen, and there are times when the storage pond cannot hold all that reclaimed water. When that happens, the water is discharged into Philippi Creek, eventually making its way to the Intercoastal Waterway, Sarasota Bay, and the Gulf of Mexico. Over 800 million gallons of nitrogen-polluted water have been discharged from the Bee Ridge facility in the last few years. We all remember red tide. While not caused by nitrogen pollution, it is a scientific fact that harmful algae bloom, like red tide, feed on nitrogen. Undertreated wastewater, old leaky septic tanks, and spill-offs from lawns and agriculture create a toxic cocktail that threatens public health and the environment. County commissioners recently held budget workshops in which they approved funding to upgrade the reclamation technology at Bee Ridge. And while that's a step in the right direction, we're 50 years late. More spills are nearly certain before the facility is improved, while the risk of another red tide is impossible to calculate. And to make matters worse, right now there are federal and state lawsuits pending against the county because of the Bee Ridge discharges. Later in the show, we will talk to the chair of the Sarasota County Commission. But first, to get a legal lay of the land, we start with noted environmental attorney and activist Justin Bloom.
There are a few different lawsuits or actions that are currently going on right now. One is being developed by the Florida DEP, the Department of Environmental Protection. They're doing an enforcement action that we call a consent order. So the state agency wrote the county a warning letter several months ago when it became clear to them that the spills coming from the Bee Ridge reclamation pond and also the Bee Ridge collection system were really significant. So that warning letter led to a series of draft orders, which is the typical way that the state will enforce their environmental laws. They'll negotiate a consent order in which the government polluter entity will come into compliance with the state laws. So they're still negotiating that. The second is the citizen suit action that was brought by Suncoast Waterkeeper. That is a Clean Water Act lawsuit that is currently pending in federal court. So there are two different actions, two different levels, really. One is at the federal court system, and the other is an administrative action in the state of Florida.
So the county has been aware of the problems at the Bee Ridge facility for a long time. So why do you think they haven't been able or willing to comply with the state DEP?
They have been in violation for quite some time. I think back to 2010 probably they started recognizing, and they should have even before that, when doing long-term planning, recognize the likelihood of problems at Bee Ridge. Why they didn't adequately plan and undertake actions that would avoid these types of spills is complicated, and I'm really flabbergasted as to why action wasn't taken earlier. And I think that there's dysfunction and has been dysfunction at several different levels. I think that the staff in the utilities department failed to recognize the situation, failed to communicate with their counterparts in the environmental or stormwater section of the utility. There was inadequate communication with the county commissioners who I believe didn't understand the severity of the situation. So I think most of the failures had been at the staff level. Although I would say that the county commission has to have ownership over these types of failures. And like many local governments throughout the state of Florida, there's been a lack of investment in environmental infrastructure for many years. So this specific case, I think that the details will become revealed over time, but I think it's indicative of a lack of investment in environmental infrastructure in general.
You're the founder of Suncoast Waterkeeper, an environmental advocacy organization. So tell me about what you do there, what lawsuit you filed, and what's been going on for the past few years.
Sure. Suncoast Waterkeeper is a Sarasota-based nonprofit that protects local waterways, and we focus on water issues. I think what we stand apart from other organizations in that we are very advocacy-oriented, and we bring lawsuits when needed. We try to avoid them, but we've been involved in a number of prominent land use cases. And then we filed a few lawsuits up in Pinellas County several years ago at the height of these series of really bad hurricanes and storms that overwhelmed St. Petersburg's sewage system. At the time that we were litigating that, I started taking a closer look at home. And I discovered this spill at Bee Ridge, which really the public and many people in government were not aware of. Now the county has a responsibility to report spills. Their interpretation of that requirement was really loose. And so these spills at Bee Ridge have been going on for some time. and the duration of the spills sometimes exceeded 2 months. So what would happen is that their system, the reclaimed water system, would be overwhelmed. The storage pond could only hold 165, 170 million gallons of this partially treated sewage. And without adequate demand by larger developments and golf courses and users of this irrigation water, reclaimed water, without that adequate demand, they had no choice but to spill it over the weir into the stormwater system, which fed it into Philippi Creek. But what they would do is they would just report when it started spilling and then when it stopped. So there would only be 2 reports that really didn't appear to be significant, even to someone who's kind of studying and reading these reports.
If you were in charge and you had the funds, what would you do at Bee Ridge? Is advanced wastewater treatment the solution?
Yeah, I would say at Bee Ridge, there are multiple problems. Advanced wastewater treatment, or AWT, is, I believe, the best solution, long-term solution for their problems with the reclaimed water system. There are 2 parts of the problem, though. So we start at the beginning with the collection system. That's all of the sewage that comes from people's homes and businesses and goes through an assortment of pipes that conveys the sewage to the treatment plant. That collection system is flawed as well and is subject to too many spills. So our lawsuit takes issue with the way that they have failed to maintain and upgrade their collection system, and also their failure after they do their secondary treatment, the failure that we've been talking about, this massive spill over the weir. So if I had the ability to direct them how to fix their system, I'd say plug up the leaks in the collection system and go to AWT.
It's one thing to imagine having the funds to plug up leaks and upgrade facilities to AWT. Mustering the political will to get it done in a timely manner is different matter indeed. Our next guest grew up in Sarasota, has dedicated his life to community service, and understands the complexity of this problem.
I think it's safe to characterize it as we made a great deal of progress, but there's still a lot more work to be done. I can harken back to my childhood days where I would spend a great deal of time in the creeks catching killifish and flagfish for my aquarium in the bays, and the Gulf catching pompano redfish and snook for the dinner table. And I have seen through the decades a great deal of fluctuation in the Sarasota County's surface water quality. And today we're in a place where many of the metrics are improved and many of them have a lot of room for improvement. So I would compliment the community on a job well done, but also encourage them that there's more work to be done.
Ever since the red tide emergency last year, there has surely been a swell of community concern. But is it scientifically reasonable to conflate red tide with water quality?
Well, I would begin that conversation, or at least my response to that conversation, with something akin to never let a good crisis go to waste. And certainly the severe red tide outbreak that the most recent one, has brought the public's attention to water qualities. There was a time just a few years ago where if you were to mention things such as Carenia brevis and nutrients and all of these, you would just get blank stares. But people in the community are becoming better educated on the issues. Red tide, as with many phenomena that happen in the Gulf of Mexico or any place in our seas, happen on a cycle and a sequence that's often measured in centuries, not years. And to accumulate enough data to have empirical evidence that statistically demonstrates a link between a particular water quality parameter such as nutrients to red tide is very difficult to do, because there's just simply too much noise in the data to begin with. But it is safe to assume that the anthropogenic nutrients, the nutrients that humans produce, are the same or similar types of nitrogen and nutrients that the red tide organism Carenia brevis consumes. So there is a likely connection, but I would warn people that simply because that if that connection is removed, that red tide is going to go away. It's not, because there's plenty other nitrate, nitrogen, nutrient sources naturally in the water for red tide blooms to continue to occur as they have through the millennial. But I would also suggest that taking these pollutants out of the water has been a focus for many decades for this community, because without respect to its impact on red tide, the result is going to be a cleaner, healthier environment for our children and families to live, work, and play.
If Sarasota County goes forward with the advanced wastewater treatment that we've been talking about and upgrades our sewer system, it'll be expensive, right? And so
Yes.
what's the cost benefit? What does it look like from your perspective?
Well, the cost will be very expensive, either getting to AWT standards or in fact retrofitting to AWT, which is again advanced wastewater treatment.
Yep.
Many of the plants in Sarasota County today are far above that standards, many times that standard. And it is no doubt one of the premier anthropogenic nutrient sources to our surface waters. In other words, it is a source of nutrient pollution. So the cost will be great, but the cost-benefit analysis is one that I think demonstrates that it would be worth the investment, not only for today, but for future ratepayers and future citizens of this community. We would not only improve the water quality, but we would also provide for a wastewater product that has marketable value in terms of irrigation.
Right.
And like I said, it would be nice to restore Philippi Creek and Alligator Creek and Hudson Bayou and Whitaker to a state where a child could once again swim in it, as I did in the late 60s, early 70s.
So help me understand more about the challenges of the county's septic system. How widespread is it? Who is impacted, and where are they?
Well, let's first start with an assumption. It's an assumption that I believe in, and that is that all septic tanks are not created equal. Those septic tanks that are newer are likely less of a source of nutrient pollution because of the standards that they were constructed by versus the older ones, which did not have the standards such as the grain of sand, the elevation from the water table, and the setback from waterways. So it would first be, getting back to that cost-benefit analysis, I mean, there's over 40,000 septic tanks in Sarasota County. Converting all of those tanks into a collective wastewater treatment system is simply not cost feasible. So you need to prioritize. You need to pick those that are going to have the greatest impact on water quality and do those first. And those would likely be the older septic tanks that are in close proximity to to our surface waters, meaning the creeks and the bays. But I would caution that many, if you did a map and charted those tanks that were older, many of them are going to be in our affordable housing stock today. Families that are what we refer to as ALICE, the asset limited income constrained employed, where they need pretty much every paycheck to pay the bills. Imposing upon them additional fees for either fixing, repairing, or converting their septic tanks to central sewer is likely going to drive many of them out of their house. So I'm not saying you shouldn't do it. In fact, I am suggesting still that we should do it, but we need to make sure that when we impose these inspections and required repairs, that we have a funding source to help those income qualified households to make those necessary repairs or hookups. In absence of doing it, it's just going to be met with wholesale opposition, and likely won't even happen.
Sure, if they're responsible for the leaks and upkeep of that would cause a lot of.
It would, and keep in mind, these homes were created in the absence of central
Sure.
sewer
Sewer systems.
by a decision of a permitting body.
So in light of this, so what kind of funding support do we need from the state to, provide counties in need of the treatment?
Well, I think it would be
What do we do?
helpful. The state has made a water quality a priority,
Yeah.
and I compliment Governor DeSantis for raising this issue to the level that he has. And I look forward to subsequent years in the state legislature where they move beyond just funding for research and actually dedicate money towards solutions. And in Sarasota's case, and many coastal counties, this is not unique or distinctive to Sarasota County, investments in our collective wastewater, what they call off-site wastewater treatment, which are sewer plants,
Sure.
is a worthy investment. And the state should be offering those monies or those loans to those communities that kind of pony up, and so that the state can leverage its assets with local assets to bring these improvements to the communities that also want to help with the funding. Likewise with the septic tank. The state and the federal government for years had funding programs available to local governments for septic to sewer conversions and for wastewater treatment improvements. The vast majority of those funding sources have been eliminated. And unfortunately, in the state of Florida, one of the sources that Sarasota County government used to rely upon, which was the Pollution Recovery Trust Fund, has been depleted to the point of near bankruptcy in recent years because we have not been holding polluters accountable for their misdeeds, and thus there were no fines or penalties being contributed, and now there are no funding resources for local governments such as Sarasota County.
Final words. You just participated in our water summit. We've got to the point where we just had a major water summit. What did you take away from that?
So I think we've heard the message
Right.
from the experts, from the scientists, from the engineers, and it's very clear. These are the improvements that need to be made. We need to focus on stormwater and wastewater in particular. We need to make the improvements, and the data is there, the research is firm, and the time to act is now.
I have to agree with John. The time to act is now. We have been kicking the can down the road for far too long. Unfortunately, the political will to act can stagnate until there is a major crisis. Case in point, red tide. Our next guest knows a thing or two about politics, crisis management, and the slow process of getting big public works projects done. Chair of the Sarasota County Commission, Charles Hines.
It's a slow, long-term fix to go that route, and it's expensive, it disrupts neighborhoods, and it takes a long time. We'll go that route and continue to do Philippi Creek and look for other areas. South Venice is the next one probably to take a look where there's a large number of septic tanks right close to water bodies, but that's going to be a 10 or 15-year project. Shorter term is taking a look at our wastewater systems that currently exist, and I think you had the opportunity to tour our Bee Ridge plant.
Yes, yes.
So the cities are ahead of the county in regards to advanced water treatment. So one of the things that we're going to consider tomorrow at our budget workshop is, do we fund taking that Bee Ridge plant to the AWT treatment
Right.
like the cities have done?
AWT, what do you mean?
Advanced water treatment. So what I was saying is, it's how much nitrogen are you taking out of the water, the reuse water. So you have the wastewater that comes in, you treat that water, and then the ultimate goal is to really use that when we say reuse, water yards, sprinkler golf courses, those types of things.
What's it going to cost?
Yeah.
What's the timing on all this?
Very expensive. I think it's going to be in the hundreds of millions. We have a big presentation tomorrow at our budget workshop that'll bring us up to speed. One thing that we want to do, I know as a commission, is move this project forward as quickly as possible. It just really appears to be the right thing to do, and it's not going to flip a switch tomorrow because it needs to be planned. It's designed. We have 3 wastewater plants. Bee Ridge is one of them. I think what's being considered now is make potentially 2 of them advanced water treatment and do the other one almost like a transfer facility into the B Ridge. So it's not just, I want the public to understand, if we budgeted it for tomorrow and said, go do it,
Yeah.
it's going to take a couple years, I believe, to get it implemented, but I think that's where our commission will be headed. I think there's some misperception in the public that somehow this is new development that's causing this. And the new development, most everyone that's of any significant size that's planned is on already septic, and not on septic tanks, on central water and sewer.
Central.
Okay, so you don't have the septic tank problems. They pay significant amounts of impact fees toward that. And those go to stormwater, and also all the larger developments must have stormwater plans to deal with that additional runoff that they have to capture. Honestly, it's the older developments that are on septic tanks, that older neighborhoods that have existing roads that are getting redeveloped,
Right.
they're bringing in fill, that stormwater runs off into, you know, the stormwater drains, totally untreated, right into our bays. Now, the city's done a good job with a lot of its, when you're on the city commission, to try to deal with that stormwater runoff where it doesn't just go from the street right into the bay. Have some filtering systems that you filter that through so that when it ultimately gets out to the bay, it's gone through that. And that's hard to do in existing neighborhoods because, again, you're tearing up roads,
Sure.
you're taking space. It's hard to build a 5-acre stormwater pond in the middle of an existing neighborhood.
Exactly.
But that's what we're starting to have to look at. So another thing that people don't recognize is a lot of these older homes, I use South Venice for example, many of them are on septic tanks, pretty much all of them. They were built in the 60s, 70s, early 80s.
Right.
They were retirement homes. Most of those people are only here half the year. Now, they're working class homes where people are there all the time. It's not grandma and grandpa coming down here in the winter. It's a, husband and wife and 3 kids. So that shower, that washer and dryer, those toilets are being flushed. A lot more people are here now, overall population.
Putting a burden on the system.
And they're here longer.
Yeah.
So it's, we just learned a lot this past summer of we got to take care of this environment or we're
sure.
in big trouble.
I remember I was at the, whether you call it opening of our deep water injection, that people are asking, why can't the county have
Yeah.
the deep water injection well?
And that's part of the
And-
B Ridge type of things that we're
Yeah.
going to do. So we get it. We are already in the process of it. This summer, I think, pushed us to say, look, this isn't something in our capital improvement projects to do in 22 or 23, 24. Let's do it now. And
Do you think the impetus is, sometimes they conflate the two when you talk about this, but people still have red tide on their minds,
Yeah.
and there are different issues here, but it got the conversation going.
right.
And we're
then-
now down to some serious discussions.
We're always going to have red tide. People got to realize that. That's a natural occurring event. The question is, when that red tide gets close to our shores, are we making it worse by what we're putting in the water? And I think that's what all this red tide study is going on. The other thing that we didn't talk about is, legislation, not just from the state, but let's take local legislation.
Yeah.
Before we jump in and start mandating this or that or fining people for this or that, it needs to be based upon science. We just don't want to do a knee-jerk reaction of, okay, if you have a septic tank, it must be pumped out every year. Will that make a difference? It might. What it has to be inspected every 3 years and do that. So those are the types of things that we're considering. Those are also being considered at the state level. But we want to make sure that that will make a difference. We're not just writing laws to write laws. And then at the same time of this red tide, you had the blue-green algae down in the East Coast and of Florida and
Okeechobee.
along the West Coast down Lee County and Collier County, hitting all at the same time. It was bad, and so they're not, in my view, they're not related in the same type of algae. They're not, but it appears that what man is doing is exacerbating the red tide, and potentially with the way we've done or managed Lake Okeechobee
Yeah.
has really caused problems down there.
How about existing tanks that are leaking? Are we all satisfied? Are you satisfied with the present level of county inspections and enforcement?
Yeah. I don't know that we have in regards to septic tanks any inspections. So we used to, and I think that was something that Representative Robinson put in at the state level to require that. Then what he found out is, well, there's people all across the state, if you're going to make a statewide law, that if you got a septic tank on a 5-acre or 10-acre ranch in the middle of the state, why are we putting that law over them?
Right.
So that one didn't pass. I think he's going to bring it back, but maybe make some tweaks to it. And I think that's something locally here the Sarasota County can consider, as long as we're not preempted by the state, to potentially do that. But what's the right way to do it? Is it going to make a difference in regards to just getting those septic tanks pumped out, or if they're broken, to get them fixed? That makes sense to me, and I think that's probably one of the next logical steps. If the state can't do it, then that's something here locally we could legislate and put into effect.
And about the preemption, it just prompted me what triggers with the state when you've got preemption, that you've got the Florida Department of Environmental Protection with this 800 million gallon spill that they're all talking about. And where do you go with that? Because is it regulation? Is it just politics? Because can you regulate that? Is that something that we really need to be, if you're going to have a lawsuit or tackle this is against the Clean Water Act, well, is it a point system? What are they measuring and how do you cure it?
Yeah. One thing was, I just returned last week from the Florida Association of Counties, and there is a water quality board that's been appointed within the Florida Association of Counties. And one of the speakers there was from the federal environmental protection. And I was somewhat disappointed in some of the statements. They didn't feel like they had enough power to regulate some of these things, and really was taking a look at our state to do it. So we're really, I think, looking at, and it's a funny saying, but I think the Department of Environmental Protection needs to be the entity that drives the bus for the entire state of Florida. And normally local government likes to do things and asks Tallahassee to kind of leave us alone because we're all different and unique. But this might be one that, if it comes down from the state, that says you will do this, then it'll help local government implement things. And so I'm open to those types of ideas, and working with DEP to say, give us some ideas, give us some regulations, so that we just don't, this city does that city does this, this county does that, this county does something different. When this water body of the Gulf, needs all of us working on the same page.
Getting everyone on the same page is exactly what we need. Hopefully, elected leaders like Commissioner Hines can accelerate the process. Sarasota County does not have another 5 years to get this done. And I never thought I'd see the day when I would quote Richard Nixon's call to save the environment. But here we are, 50 years later. Our Mother Nature account is overdrawn. We all have responsibility: homeowners, residents, developers, politicians. And let's not kid ourselves, folks. There will be a price to pay. For more information on the Bee Ridge plant, go to scgov.net and follow the link below. For more on Suncoast Waterkeeper, go to suncoastwaterkeeper.com. And you can see this show and all our past episodes on my website, SuzanneAtwellShow.org, on Facebook, and on YouTube. Well, that wraps it up for us. Until next time, thanks for watching, and we'll see you around town.